Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are back on the homestead, back in the home studios from Ocean City, but you will hear tons of Ocean City stuff all over WNST and Baltimore Positive all week. We sat with lots and lots of electeds, talked to others, set up other things into the future for our oyster tour next month, as well as the crab cake tour, which has been stalled the last couple of weeks with vacations and football training camps. But we get back after it on Friday. We're going to be at Fadley's with our friends from the Maryland Lottery. We have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube, Multi-Care, and Liberty Pure Solutions. I've got some fresh shirts from Liberty Pure Solutions, and Doug Workman and the folks there are doing a great job keeping your well water clean and fresh, as well as all of your plumbing needs at Liberty Pure Solutions. This guy has all of your sports needs taken care of. We talk all the time around here about how I'm banned for being a bad guy. This guy's been doing double duty all month long. We're into the month of August. Orioles go on the West Coast next week. We'll give him maybe a little bit of a break, but they've been home for a while. We'll be Friday together at Fadley's down at Lexington Market. We welcome Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, back onto the program to, you want to do football? You want to do baseball? Let's do baseball because, that's sort of pending, and the football thing's not fun, although, you had to get up, do that on Saturday morning as well. Boy, the baseball team, this is as relevant a season as I ever remember for a roller coaster ride, for a team that matters a lot, that's slipping a little bit, that wins half the time now lately. But, boy, the deficiencies are glaring, and the bats are an issue when they're not. And the bullpen and Craig Kimbrell, we're talking about everything but the rotation where they've lost three of their starters. This is a fascinating 6-week run because as much as you were telling me, convincing me, guaranteeing me they were making the playoffs, I don't know, dude. They're going to have to play decent baseball to make the playoffs now. They can't be just okay or mediocre or 3 games under 500 the rest of the way and make the playoffs.
Well, I mean, you say that, but we keep talking about this, and the Orioles wake up Monday morning tied for the best record in the American League. I mean, it's what it is at this point, Nestor. I mean, and you're not wrong in saying that they've been a 500-ish kind of team for about close to a third of a season now. I mean, it's just the heavy lifting that they did through the first 2.5 months that have kept them in this position. But you look around at the rest of baseball, and we keep saying this about the Orioles, but you have to look around at what else is going on, and same things are being said in New York. Cleveland, after a couple weeks ago, thinking they were the best team in the AL, they've been very mediocre. I mean, the Astros are kind of the latest flavor of the month to get hot, but we've talked about them in those terms 3 or 4 different times where they get really hot and then they come back down to earth. Talk about the Twins, talk about the Mariners. If we go down the list, I mean, the Red Sox had their really impressive run before the All-Star break, and they've been largely treading water ever since then. So there is no dominant team in the AL, and we can keep looking at the Orioles and look, I don't disagree with the fact that they have issues. I mean, if not for Albert Suarez on Sunday, a frustrating weekend turns into a very lost weekend, especially when you consider how well Eflin pitched on Thursday night to win the opener against the Red Sox. But this is just the American League right now. This is Major League Baseball collectively. There is no dominant team, and even those teams that we thought were the dominant teams, including the Orioles earlier in the year, have been not so dominant for quite a long time now, whether you're talking about Orioles, Yankees, Phillies. So we're going to see how this plays out over the final month and a half, to your point. I still feel outstanding about their playoff chances, despite what you just said. I mean, you're still talking about a team that would have to play worse than they've played even over the last 5 or 6 weeks to really be in jeopardy there. But
somebody else has to come and get them, to your point.
Sure,
I mean, right. In the NFL, when you're struggling at Thanksgiving, you always assume somebody's going to go 4-1 or 5-2 to sort of end the year. In baseball, you think, well, somebody's going to play 10 games over 500 the rest of the way, right? Maybe not. Maybe they're all just going to trip over each other. Maybe all of their 4th and 5th starters are no good, although our 5th starter looks like our 2 starter and our 1 starter looks like our 4 starter this weekend. I mean, it's really been a dogs and cats operation on a daily basis that if you get together one day it's the bats, one day it's the arms, and then it's Craig Kimbrell.
Yeah, I mean, it's collectively been an issue, but it's still been much more of an issue on the pitching side. I think that's evident. And What a strange series from the standpoint of Nestor. If I told you on Thursday morning that the Orioles would get quality starts from Zach Eflin, which that wouldn't be surprising because he's pitched that well since he's become an Oriole. Cade Povich in a spot start, and Albert Suarez. They'd get quality starts from those three, and they would score 10 runs on the night that Corbin Burns. You'd be saying, wow, that's a great recipe for a 4-game sweep over the Red Sox. And yet they struggled to just get the split on Sunday. So frustrating from that standpoint. Obviously, we've talked about the bats. By and large, yeah, they're still one of the best offenses in baseball, but it's been a little more high and low than you'd like in recent weeks, and certainly was frustrating on Saturday night, especially when Cade Povich comes up from the minor leagues just to give Suarez and the rest of the rotation an extra day, and he pitches his butt off, and they scored 1 run. So frustrating when that happens, but in the big picture sense, I'll continue to say this, and even though I have some doubts from time to time about it, I can't exhaust that much energy worrying about their offense because I'm not sure what are you expecting to happen that's going to change other than Jordan Westberg coming back. And we could talk about Mayo, we could talk about Kerstad, whatever. Point is, the offense is largely intact, Westberg aside. The pitching, that's where you look at it and say, okay, what's it going to look like the rest of the year?
Well, it's
And
a
the road.
scramble. I don't think there's any doubt about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, even Corbin Burns in the month of August suddenly not pitching well. Now, I'm not going to sit here and panic about Corbin Burns because, again, if you're going to panic about that, then you're going to give yourself an ulcer the rest of the way. I mean, it's just it is what it is. It's a dry spell, a tough stretch for him. The velocity was okay on Friday night. I didn't see anything that was alarming in terms of wondering if there's a physical concern, but he gives up a career high 8 runs in a game where the Orioles scored a lot of runs. So that was frustrating, but Eflin's pitched so well. Albert Suarez, who I wrote about at BaltimorePositive.com on Sunday night. I mean, this is the guy that we've tried to diminish, replace, underestimate throughout the
Like every
season.
other Venezuelan in Baltimore, by the way. Let me point that out.
But I mean, he's just been such a good story. And, from the moment that he replaced an injured Tyler Wells back in mid-April, he's done a more often than not, a really commendable job. And he's done that this latest 3 weeks where Grayson Rodriguez goes on the IL, lat strain minutes before that start in Toronto. And at the time, you're kind of wondering, is this the injury that breaks the camel's back? Is this where it really goes to, where as far as the rotation goes? And I mean, it's not as though Suarez is the Orioles have won all those starts, but 17 and 2/3 scoreless innings. He's pitched at such a high level relative to what, forget about relative to where he was. I mean, his ERA is not far off from Corbin Burns at this point. I mean, that's how good he's been. So it's
Better than Kyle Gibson. Better than those names that we throw out every offseason, right?
And forget about that. Just look at the present, the here and now. We spent a lot of time a couple weeks ago talking about who would be the fourth starter in a longer playoff series. Would it be Dean Kramer or Trevor Rogers at this point? It's Albert Suarez. And Albert Suarez, until Grayson Rodriguez comes back, is your number 3 starter. And there's no disputing it because he's been that good. I mean, the question about whether he's going to hold up and fatigue and all that, and that's fair. I mean, that's the same discussion you have about anyone at this point in time. It's 2024 in Major League Baseball. Pitchers are fragile. Newsflash if you haven't paid attention, especially to the Orioles this year. But he's just done a terrific job for them, and he got better as his start went on Sunday, and ends up striking out 3. And the last pitch of the day that he threw was his hardest pitch of the day to record the strikeout and strand 2 runners in the 6th inning. So what a story. I mean, and look, we've talked about it, all kidding aside, we've talked about Albert Suarez being a good story, but it's always been through the lens of waiting for someone else to come replace him or to upgrade from him. And we need to stop doing that because he's just been that good. And of course, they need Grayson Rodriguez to come back and be right. There's no question about that. And you want the upside. But as things stand now, and just like with anyone else, he's got to continue doing it. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay fresh. They gave him the extra day over the weekend with that in mind. He threw 99 pitches on Sunday, which was a season high. But if he continues to do anything close to what he's done, especially these last few weeks, he's going to be pitching meaningful innings, not just in September, but into October. So, I mean, just a terrific story. And it's crazy to think, where would they be without Albert Suarez? I'll say this much. He's not the MVP of the team or anything like that, but they certainly wouldn't be tied for first place without him. That much is the obvious with how huge he's been at a few different points this season. And yeah, he's had a couple rough stretches, specifically in the month of July, but he's rebounded, and he's done it at a time where the Orioles absolutely had a need when, I've just mentioned the rotation, let alone talking about Craig Kimbrell and really the mess that is the entire bullpen, save for Sir Anthony Dominguez at the moment. Albert Suarez has just been so huge for them, and he was once again on Sunday. And like I said, turned what was still a frustrating weekend, but that could have been a completely lost weekend had they gone out there and lost on Sunday.
It's amazing because 33 years I've been doing sports radio here, and we have off seasons every year, right? And in those off seasons, and we're in one right now with the Ravens, still an off season, they're not playing. You say, who are they going to add? And the Ravens this week, this is a week they could add another Clowney, another Van Noy, another piece to the offensive line, a savior that comes in last minute that you don't think about, or even trade for Roquan Smith on the trading deadline, which is what they've done, right? Like a sort of a generational player that they pick up in the middle of the season, and you don't think about it. Certainly not in football, where there weren't a lot of trades, but the baseball side of this, we spend the offseason saying, where's Kyle Gibson? Where's the pitching? Who are they going to sign? And then you wake up in August, they're in first place, and it's some KBO 30-something reject Venezuelan guy who hasn't pitched in the big leagues in years. And there's always, on good teams, there's always a story like that. There's always some guy that didn't come up through the system, wasn't a part of some rosy trade, wasn't some guy that's been in your system that blossoms the way maybe some of those Royals guys did at the end, where they stunk for a while and then they got good. We didn't talk anything about Suarez being a savior or how many innings he was going to suck up. We just knew back in February they were going to need something beyond what they had.
Sure. And it's funny to think about it, because he had the start in the spring against the Phillies, where going up against some of the Philly starters, I think he pitched 3 innings, he struck out 7. So it was one of those performances where you say, hey, that's interesting. So you go through
Got
the
a
spring.
live arm is what we said.
Sure,
right?
sure. You go through the spring, and you and I even saw out. You may not remember it, because I don't remember anything about it that it was that particularly memorable. He didn't pitch all that well on that night, but he started that game at Fenway South that you and I were there at the end of spring training. And Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias said at the time, and you hear these things about different guys, and sometimes it's lip service and sometimes it's sincere, but they made comment of they're going to need him at some point in time. And I believed that. I believed at that point in time he would start at some point in time, because you need more than 5 starters. You need more than 6 or 7 starters. You need typically 10 or 11. I mean, even the best teams are going to have some injuries and some things that happen, let alone what happened to the Orioles this year with the number of starters they've lost.
Jim Palmer used the stat that the league average was 12.
Yeah, that's very typical. I mean, even in the years where your basic 5 makes it through the year intact with, maybe a tweaked hamstring IL stint here or there. One guy has a sore elbow for a few weeks, but nothing more than that. You're still going to need some spot starters, right? So
but the days of 5 starters and everybody making 31, 3 of the guys making 31 that's all over with. That's done.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's still guys who make 30 starts, but I mean, even if they do, they're going 5 or 6 innings per start, not 7 or 8.
30 starts, 129 innings on the year.
I mean, and we've seen it. I mean, you're talking now where if someone goes 200 to 210 or 15 innings, I mean, that's your workhorse. Yeah. That's your workhorse now. I mean, it's where it is. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good for baseball.
But it makes relief pitching on a to your kind of math so much more important. Absolutely. Because there's going to be so much more of it.
You need as much pitching as possible. So that's where, when you hear Mike Elias in the last week of March talking about your starting pitching depth, and at the time it was all about what? When's John Means coming back? When's Kyle Bradish coming back? And they did make it back. Problem is they didn't stay for long because they didn't stay healthy. But even at that point in time, Mike Elias said that Albert Suarez was someone that they were excited about because they felt that, hey, this guy was pitching in the KBO last year, and we had him in Florida in September, and they made some adjustments, and he pitched in winter ball and made some tweaks and came to spring training and had made himself into an option for them, and they needed him. They needed him quickly, right? I mean, Tyler Wells went on the IL in mid-April, and they've been kind of sort of waiting or trying to replace him at every junction since then. But he's been terrific, and he's asked them, or they've asked him to do whatever, and he does it, right? I mean, whether it's pitching in the pen, whether it's a spot start, whether it's going deep into games, whether it's shortening them up a little bit, whether it's moving them back, whether it's an emergency spot start. I mean,
We're
he's
smoking
done it
guys
all.
on the 99th pitch.
Yeah, he's done it all, and he's done it at a high level. And that fastball, I mean, on Sunday, that fastball, I mean, the off speed, that's gotten better for him against the lineup that was pretty lefty heavy in Boston on Sunday. And I mean, he's just, he's doing a heck of a job. And at a time where they've had such a need, he's stepped up. I mean, we talk about this all the time, whether it's someone that you're, a young guy that you're waiting to take the next step, or whether it's a journeyman. And look, a decade ago, it was Miguel Gonzalez, right? A decade plus. It was another guy who was kind of a journeyman and, was off the radar and had pitched elsewhere and all of that. So Albert Suarez doing what he's done, not knowing what's going to happen from this point forward. I mean, who knows? You don't know about anyone, but again, it's time to stop talking in terms of waiting for this guy to step up or this. He's the guy that stepped up. I mean, he's done that. And again, hasn't been perfect, but it's been way more good than bad over the course of 2024. And the numbers don't lie. And how about the fact that he leads Major League Baseball with 8 scoreless starts of 5+ innings? I mean, just think about that for a moment. 8 scoreless starts of, and I get it, 5 or more. When it's 5 innings, it's not as impressive as 7 or 8, but
Five's impressive. 5 shutout innings in the big leagues is,
for someone like him, especially. I mean, think about it. Corbin Burns doesn't have that, and Corbin Burns has been a Cy Young candidate. So it just speaks to
that says
what
to me he
he's
doesn't
done.
give up home run balls, because that's the easiest way to put a spot up.
That's fair. I mean, that's fair. I mean, you look at his numbers. I mean, he's done the job, and he's done it at a high level, and it's been admirable. And he hasn't, not that he would complain, given that he hadn't pitched in the majors since 2017, but they've kind of seesawed him back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen at a couple points, and he's just, whatever they've needed, he's been able to offer them more often than not. He had the rough stretch in July, where he had, I think it was a 3-week or a 3-start stretch where it was rough, right? He had that start at the Trop where it did not go well. At a start in Houston that didn't go well, and you're kind of thinking, okay, is this kind of the beginning of the end for Albert Suarez in terms of really being relevant and a big part of what they're doing? And from the moment that he got the ball when Grayson Rodriguez was scratched minutes before that first pitch at Rogers Center, he's done terrific. And really the only knock had been that the offense hadn't done enough for him, but they did just enough on Sunday. 3 hits? As long as it's an Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson home run, it's enough. But I mean, it's been such a good story. And again, we talked about him in passing back in March, and we saw him even make a spring start. And it's so funny, at the time you're thinking, well, this guy's your 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th starting pitcher. I mean, how much are you going to need him? Well, turns out they needed him a whole lot, and he's answered the bell. I mean, just a really big for them, and it's come at this time where Burns isn't pitching well, and Rodriguez isn't pitching at all. And we've talked about Kramer, we've talked about Rogers. So it really has been so huge to have him step up, and it's one of their 3 best starting pitchers right now. There's no question about that. We'll see what the final 6 weeks or so bring, but there's not enough positive that you can say about Albert Suarez, and certainly the Orioles needed him on Sunday once again.
Luke and I will be here all week. We're going to be at Fadley's on Friday. Wear my Fadley shirt. We'll have some Gold Rush 7 doublers to give away. The Raven scratch-offs now made available after the preseason game against the Falcons this week. I was in Ocean City all last week. You're going to hear a lot of great conversations this week about sports and about our state and the state of our state, people in our state, people running our state, and all that good stuff. But in the meantime, the Orioles will be in another state. They'll be in a New York state of mind, taking on the Mets, coming back against the Cheat Stros this weekend. The bats and the chilliness of the bats and who's in and who's out. We'll get to Eflin, we'll get to the bullpen, we'll get to Kimbrel and all that. But the bats, they can't score 10 runs every night, 8 runs every night. But on the nights they do, they need to win. And the Burns thing aside, I'll call that an outlier right now. I don't know if you're worried about him or not, but just the bats in a general sense. This is how they got outed in October last year. They literally stopped hitting the ball. And over 3 games. And it has been worrisome to me that they don't hit double, and make long innings. They are relying on long ball, and they don't walk a lot. And they're not a station-to-station team. They run the bases well. I mean, I think they take third and, first to third and do all that type of stuff pretty well. But just in manufacturing runs, in supporting starters when you're in the 5th inning and you look up and they have a 0 and so do you. And pitch selection, just all of it. We focus so much on the pitching, but the hitting the last 45 to 60 days has been choppy, if not disappointing. And I know you'll say they lead the league in this, and you'll give me all that. I'm just saying what my eyes have seen here over the last 6 weeks as they start to scuffle. They're not consistent, man, at all.
Yeah, I mean, who is? I'm not disagreeing with you when I say that, but I don't know what to really tell you that's the solution for it. I mean, they need to be a little more consistent. I disagree. I don't disagree with that, but who's this great offense that's more consistent? I don't know, right? I mean, the Yankees have like 3 guys that two all world, all universe hitters, and they've got a couple other decent hitters, and they have lineup woes. So I mean, they lost the game on Sunday night because they only scored a couple runs and wasted what was an admirable start from Stroman going up against Tariq Skubal. It's Major League Baseball in 2024, and yes, I agree. I'd like to see them be more consistent. And certainly when you look at some individuals, Adley Rutschman, Sunday aside, where he finally hits his first home run since what, the first series after the All-Star break. That was his first home run in almost a month. And Rutschman even missed a Friday's start because of a sore back and came off the bench on Saturday. So they absolutely need Adley Rutschman to be Adley Rutschman. We've seen Gunnar Henderson start to hit the long ball again, over the last 4 or 5 games. So that's been a positive sign. We've talked about Ryan Mountcastle, even Ryan O'Hearn, who's been good from an average standpoint, but hasn't hit the long ball with the same level. They've missed Jordan Westburg. That's obvious. I think Jordan Westburg is such a consistent force in their lineup. And look, Ramon Arias has done a nice job stepping up, especially after the initial Kobe Mayo stint in the majors did not go well. And, we've seen that with some other young guys. So not necessarily blaming him or panicked about him moving forward, but it just is what it is. Sometimes a 22-year-old isn't quite ready to contribute in the majors. And we've seen that now 3 or 4 times over the last few years with some of the Orioles' top prospects. But yeah, they need to be more consistent. I agree. I don't necessarily know who the other offenses in baseball that you prefer over the Orioles. I mean, even some of those teams that have similar numbers go through their stretches where they're not as consistent. But I said it last week. I wrote it last week at BaltimorePositive.com. We've talked about it on our airwaves. Their offense is going to have to do the heavy lifting. There's no question about that. And that's why it was even more frustrating on Saturday, where they get this surprising, really quality outing from Cade Povich, who made a spot start and is back in the minors, and sure we'll see him again, especially on the heels of pitching as well as he did. But you wasted that, And then on Friday night they get a big offensive output, and Corbin Burns was awful. So I mean, it's kind of where they've been. It's been a frustrating stretch. I mean, you go back to where they were back in late June after that series in the Bronx, where you and I are at Costas Inn watching that blowout, and they're 49-25 and looking like they've got a chance to challenge the 69-70 Orioles for most wins in franchise history and all of that. And they've played, they've gone 24-27 since then. They've been a 500 kind of baseball team for a third of a season now. So, a big part of being better than that down the stretch will be to be more consistent. And I agree with that. But at the same time, I still have to look with the proper context of looking around baseball and say, okay, if we're saying all this about the Orioles, well, then who are the offenses that you like so much better than them? And, I'd venture to say that there are other teams that are consistent and kind of all or nothing and that. I mean, it's kind of where we are. I think a lot of the standard we're comparing them to is a standard that we just have in our mind of what it looks like in the past, and not really sure who the teams are that you'd prefer. I mean, would you prefer to have? Okay, I'll hear you'd rather have Aaron Judge and Juan Soto at the top of your lineup, but would you rather have the rest of the Yankees lineup behind them? I don't think so. So they've got to be more consistent. I agree. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it being up and down. At the same time, I'm not really sure who those teams are that that we hold them to a standard that we'd rather them be more like that. So they've got to score. They've got to hit the ball. That's obvious. We've only touched on the bullpen. The bullpen will continue to be such an issue. Who do you trust? Dominguez, I guess that's about it right now. Even he gave up a solo homer on Sunday as he pitched a 4-out save, but they've got to hit the ball, and they've got to get Jordan Westburg back next month. It feels like the defense has stabilized a little bit. It feels like the defense the last week and a half, 2 weeks has been better than it had been for a while. That's been good to see at the very least. But yeah, there are times where the offense is pretty maddening because you know what they're capable of, and then you see them go out there against someone like Cutter Crawford, who had been pretty awful over his last last recent starts that he's had, and he shut them down for the most part on Sunday. So I hear you. Believe me, I do. I'm not trying to make excuses for them. I look at it and say I'll still take their upside over most offenses in baseball, but you've got to do it. And you mentioned last October. Keep in mind they didn't pitch either. I mean they didn't hit in game one. They actually hit the ball pretty well in game two, but they didn't pitch at all. And then game three against the Rangers, they didn't do either. So yeah, you got to be more consistent. You got to do more than they did on Sunday, even, which 4 runs on 3 hits. That's typically not going to be a successful formula. So I hear you loud and clear, but at the same time, it's also kind of where we are with Major League Baseball at this point in time. And we can keep bemoaning it, but I still look at it and see the Orioles being one of the top scoring offenses in baseball. So they've got to be more consistent. There's no question, and they've got to be better down the stretch, especially given the state of the rotation and especially the bullpen. Sunday was another example of a 4-0 lead, and all you're thinking, even with a relatively rested bullpen, all you're thinking is it going to hold up? And even those final 3 innings with their best guys, what qualifies as their best guys out there pitching on Sunday, it still felt way too dicey, way too hairy compared to what you would hope it would feel like when you're leading 4-0.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. The Orioles in New York, back home against the Cheatstros this weekend, beginning on Thursday. We'll be at Fadley's on Fridays with the Gold Rush 7 doublers, our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, as well as Jiffy Lube. We have a whole bunch of new sponsors for football season. We're going to welcome Coppin State University in a big way, and Dr. Anthony Jenkins. Also, we had a big week in Ocean City last week. Both of our sitting senators, several congressmen, county executives, lots of leaders, lots of conversations about the future of the state. So I hope you check that out. We got lots of future conversations about the future of the Baltimore Orioles as well as the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to be doing tons and tons and tons of that stuff around here this week, as well as talking about Craig Kimbrell and the bullpen at some point. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. Stick with us. Big week here. We are WNST, AM 1570, Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.